The reforms within the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited are beginning to yield positive results, with the remittance of 123 billion naira to the government's coffers, according to NNPC Chief Financial Officer Umar Ajiya. Now, 81 billion naira paid was the monthly interim dividend, while 42 billion naira was 40% from oil profits as well. Now, this is in addition to payment of royalties and taxes. This figure is a part of the 907 billion naira June revenue share to states and local governments after the Federation Account Allocation Committee meeting held on Thursday. Arise analyst Professor Abiodun Adeniyi joins us now to speak on the streamlining of the organization. Good to have you with us, Prof. So, NNPC finally remits to a Federation account with the removal of subsidy. It has remitted those amounts, as we've stated, as monthly dividend and, of course, a 40% PSC profit. So in addition to compliance on payment of royalties, and this clearly shows that the company under the current leadership probably is making headway. Is these sustainable, you think, or is there something else involved here?
Well, thank you very much and good afternoon. I think you have clearly captured it in your question. It's a very good development. That's the point we've been making over the years about the need for us to have robust administration, quality leadership, not just at the center, but of course at the subnational and agency level. You know, the new development, the new remittance from NNPC is a pointer, most likely, most definitely, to the quality of leadership that we have in that department. And like you rightly hinted, what we need at this point is sustainability of these development. You know, oftentimes, you know, we have had reports of declining resources, and not just declining resources, but of course maladministration, misappropriation of resources because of corruption, and of course corruption results from poor leadership. Now, if we are having an exemplar, you know, in NNPC, is worthy of commendation, you know, courtesy of this new development, this new story that is just breaking. But of course, maybe we should also try to put things in context. NNPC may not be able to do it alone. And of course, we do not also, first, MNSP will not be able to do this alone. We need other agencies to also be on the same page with them, you know, in the spirit of the new administration that we are having, that is trying to inject new energy, new ways of doing things as the case could be. Then, of course, there's a second point, which is to say that NNPC should ensure that this is not just a one-off development. One-off development in the sense of trying to play to the gallery, trying to justify the fact that, yes, there has been subsidy removal, and because of that, you know, we are having this outcome. No, we should have a reasonable level of continuity, you know, because the pulse, you know, is weak at the moment. National pulse is weak at the moment. Debt is rising. And of course, the role that NNPC plays, you know, the generation of revenue, you know, cannot be discontinuous in the matrix, you know. So overall, I think this is a very good development, and I think the leadership of the NNPC deserves commendation. But in saying this, we also have to have at the caveat, you know, about sustainability and about us trying to pluralize it away from NNPC, other agencies coming on board, and of course, for us to make sure that it has form and substance. Form and substance in the sense of it not just be a question of you know, the agency trying to gratify themselves to the government that is new, but of course to show that they are real. It's a qualitative shift that we are having, you know, in the management of our financial system, and of course it should be a very good herald, you know, of a new financial engineering mechanism with a new sheriff in town. So for now, we can only say congratulations to them.
All right, then. Let's speak about that money that was accrued by them. Was it even double the amount that they usually receive? Can we talk about the gains of subsidy removal, if any, as a result of all of this?
Yeah, if you look at it overall, it's a very complex system. So oftentimes we have conflicting facts emanating from that sector, you know, and that's why in the past has been characterized with different levels of reports, some of them absolutely unsalutary. And very recently, in the wake of, at the twilight of the last president, at the twilight of President Buhari's exit, there were reports that the government was owing them 2.1 trillion in subsidy payment. We haven't heard anything about that anymore. Is that to say that they are going to lose that money to government, or is the government still expected to pay them? You know, one kind of report that characterizes the nature of reports that we get from that department. Of course, it is understandable because it is the department that lays the priced egg. You know, but be that as it may, it's also the department that needs a lot more transparency, the absence of opacity, a lot more accountability, you know, as an epitome of, revenue generation in amongst other agencies in this country. We may not be definitive yet, you know, on how well we'll proceed from here, but what we can only say in the circumstances is to keep hope alive, realizing that they are also trying to break some grounds by trying to do appropriate restructuring, largely compliant with the prescriptions of the Petroleum Industry Act, you know, that makes them a private sector organization. You know, we are seeing this happening first in the restructuring, like I said, reducing their subsidiaries from 25 to 21, which is good, helping the proper management of the organization to streamline and probably synthesize things further. And what about the ongoing renovation of the refineries, Port Harcourt, Kaduna, and Warri? And of course, we know what will happen if hopefully we're able to get these refineries properly back to work, you know, complemented by the 650,000 capacity Dangote refinery. We know what the end will be, which ordinarily should mean that there will be increased stable supply of PMS. And when there's an increased supply, what does it do to demand in the market? Probably, if we go by the theoretical understanding of market forces, it means that increased supply will lead to, in the face of low demand, will lead to crash in price. If that works out for us, then of course the present pain that citizens are facing will likely be a thing of the past, you know. So what we can say in the matrix is that let's keep our eyes on the ball, you know, through the instrumentality of NNPC, and hope that tomorrow will be better than today.
Indeed, Professor Adeniyi. No, now, as you've already alluded to, transparency has always been a problem, one of the major challenges with the NNPC, especially when it comes to remittances, public remittances, that is. So, in this regard, why do you think they're speaking up now? You've already, you know, noted the fact that perhaps some kind of restructuring is taking place. Did it actually need the push of the presidency to get this done? And, you know, is there something in the works here?
Well, I think the bane of many of our agencies is their heavy reliance on silence, thinking that silence is all the kind of communication that they should do. Yes, I agree that silence can be communication, but there are some dangerous silence that you shouldn't keep. You know, and of course, at the level of NNPC, for instance, too much silence can be dangerous because you leave room you are creating room for misinterpretation and the misunderstanding of your processes and procedures in a case where you are the epicenter of revenue generation. So if they are re-strategizing, or if there's a new strategy in town, you know, to provide information, it's a welcome development, really, because, of course, information is the bedrock of action, and, of course, action often leads to progress, development, you know, or movement, as the case could be, you know. So I'm not sure that alone, that there was a presidential push, so they are reacting. I'm not sure that alone could have triggered this release, but, of course, it is very, very important, you know, so that we can also hold other agencies of government to account, or subnational levels to account. We understand that with this new addition to the federation account, of course, states are benefiting. You know, they have increased allocation across board on account of this, you know, new release from NNPC. So what it means is that we are also in a position to now call this subnational level to account what are you doing with this money. And do not forget again, of course, because of declining resources and the need for us to be much more prudent, we are having governors, after the sharing of the allocation, we are having governors thinking about saving, which means that we are being careful about the future, realizing that resources are declining. And of course, what we have now, we do not have to eat everything up, because if we eat everything up, what about our tomorrow? We do not also want to eat up our tomorrow, because we do not know what will pan out with tomorrow. So preparing for tomorrow is also a welcome development that the governors are doing, coming in tow, after the NNPC salutary action. So we are seeing a chain of action and reaction, most of them happening in the positive direction, on account of the new atmosphere in town, on account of the new administration, on account of the new policy directions. And of course, these are actually plausible, but do not forget again that our bane oftentimes is agenda setting, quite all right, decision making, quite all right, policy formulation, but of course we stop most of the time at policy formulation. And like I said earlier on somewhere else, we hardly bother much about implementation. So if we do not bother more about implementation, how about evaluation, which is also very key? All these are necessary change in the policy formulation and execution processes. So with the new development, the new administration, we should be much more mindful about completing the policy value chain, which NNPC is integral to, and which the governors are also integral to, as the case could be.
All right, so it seems like a new NNPC is emerging, but let's discuss the fuel prices and the market forces. With the extensive impact of these soaring prices of petrol on our socioeconomic sector, to what extent are we and should we allow market forces determine those prices?
Well, I think we are a pseudo or a quasi-capitalist state, and that's fundamental to most economies. Most economies are largely free, and even though they are not natural clinical capitalists like the bastion of capitalism, the United States, Canada, the UK, some other countries in the West, they tend towards free market, understanding the fact that when there is freedom, when the forces of the market are at play, there will be competition. And when there's competition, there will be quality. And when there's quality, there will be transparency and progress. It's a natural law of economics, largely. But at the same time, sometimes when there is free, excessive play of market forces, the weak often suffer, and that's where government comes in to cushion the pain through subsidy, through interventions, through regulations, as the case could be. In our own case, here we are, a weak economy, and the bulk of the funds that we have, we are using it for subsidy. And of course, we know that at the same time, if we pull out the subsidy, those who are vulnerable, those at the lower rung of the economy like that will suffer, like they are presently doing. And the onus is just back to government, to quickly intervene, because even in these bastions of capitalism, we see different levels of intervention, especially in the energy sector, which is one of the most critical sectors to the well-being of any system, whether electricity, whether fossil fuel, whether fuel, or anything you want to think about. Energy is very key. It's central to economic progress. And if you do not have any economic progress, I'm afraid you are moving towards a failed state. Those states who want to move into their direction, also, except when they are ideologically blinded. And our case, it does not fall into that bracket. So the onus is just back to the government to continue to think of ways of ameliorating the pains of the people. And that's what I think they're also doing. They've come out with some measures in the last few days, but again, the fear comes back to execution. We have a state, we have a country that is not protected, a state that is left like an orphan. In that sense, a country where we are struggling with nationalism, struggling with patriotism, where the average citizen is just looking for what he or she can get, without thinking about protecting it, and it is reflected in areas where they find themselves. So rather than contributing their quota from their little corner, participating, no matter how little it can be, to the execution of policy, they're rather looking for ways to benefit themselves. So if the narrative changes, with these new policy directions set out by the National Economic Council with respect to these palliatives, of course, we should see practical improvements in the overarching narrative around the attitude of the Nigerian worker. And of course, we should also see practical improvement or practical implementation, practical productivity of the measures that the governors are taking. And of course, we can begin to sing hallelujah. But are we going to do that? Are we going to be able to say Suhuru, with respect to policy formulation and policy implementation, such that at the end of the day, we can see the effect, the benefit. We have had some of these kinds of interventions in the past, but oftentimes it just peter out, no effect, no result, and we just move on again until there's another launch of policy direction, and the cycle continues, ad infinitum. We just hope that we can bring a stop to this so that we can, like I said, sing hallelujah once and for all.
I guess we'll have to wait a little further for singing that hallelujah, as you said, Professor Adeniyi. But I still got to take you a little, as a fallout of the fuel market and market forces here. Specifically, you have a scenario where there's always a demand for PMS, but artificial scarcity occasioned by fuel price hike scenarios is usually the challenge. So, which shows apparently the average Nigerian consumer is still vulnerable to the oil cartel or the marketers, as it were. So how do we go beyond this?
Well, I think the tendency for people to want to profiteer will always be there in a free market economy, which we're trying to be, maybe indirectly or maybe weakly. That's a given, really. But again, it will be back to government to be concerned about regulation. And of course, that's why we said earlier that government often comes in to protect the weak from the strong. Those who are unemotional, who are not sentimental about profit making. And of course, they do not care if they spill blood in the process. And when I mean blood here, I'm talking literally. So that could happen, but of course, it's just for us to strengthen regulatory mechanisms to be sure that we want to move away from the past. Otherwise, it's just going to be a free-for-all fight, and a lot more Nigerians are going to suffer if government regulatory triggers are not activated, because most Nigerians are weak, ignorant, poor, vulnerable, needing attention, and against the background of increasing population, faced with declining resources. So all these factors are playing out, and which is why policies, have to be in proper context, and beyond that, it has to also be properly managed, and do not forget what we said, central to this again is to be concerned about agencies that generate funds for us, NNPC being critical. They've done well now. We deserve praise, the management deserve praise, and probably the managing director deserve applause for this. But we also need to move away from them and also think about other sources of revenue generation. What's happening to the agricultural sector? What's happening to the mineral sector? What's happening to the tourist sector? Many nations in the world don't have some of these mineral resources, some of these resources that we pride in today, but they are prosperous. The UK is in mind, if we don't want to go too far to the UK, Rwanda is there for us to see. What do they have? Landlocked country, but they are thriving largely on tourism, the inflow of capital, irrespective of how weak their franc is, but the economy is growing, they are stabilized, and of course they are making progress, attracting tourists. So what's wrong with us looking in that direction too? We have so many other avenues that we can explore. What matters again is not just political will, but the will of not just our leaders, but the people in general. How do we all get galvanized, come onto the same page, feeling that, yes, the things that we want to achieve now are things that we probably should have achieved 30 years ago or 40 years ago, that we are just starting late. But in starting late again, we can still make progress. And the time to start is not just 50 years ago, or 60 years ago, But of course, maybe much earlier, but the point again to be made is that it is never late.
Indeed, you're right, Professor Adeniyi, is never late. But realistically, based on what we are seeing so far, do you think we're saving with this remittance? Especially, will it impact positively, calls for palliatives and everything, especially under this zero subsidy regime, you think?
Yeah, I think it will come to management, really, appropriate application of allocation and application of resources. And, there are so many agencies in this government, there are so many programs that have gone on in the past at the level of governance that are there to check how government funds, are used. But the problem with us most of the time is that rather than complying with these laws, these regulations, we often try to circumvent them. We rather learn about how to circumvent some of these laid down procedures. I remember very clearly that the Public Procurement Act is still there, and it's supposed to guide government expenditures, to what extent will you say that we've been very, very compliant? Over the years, government has again turned around to weaken it in different respects, unfortunately, forgetting the fact that it was a program, sponsored by the World Bank, injected into the system in the Obasanjo period, just to control how we spend money, because you can actually preach, you can hardly preach to people to stop being corrupt. All you need to put in place are systems and mechanisms that will discourage them or prevent them, even though they have that plan, And this was one system that was supposed to do that. And of course, there's also the public service reform project, and there are so many other programs, reform agencies, reform programs, instituted from that Obasanjo period up to the Yar'Adua period, the President Jonathan period, and onward. But what we do as citizens, unfortunately, is just to circumvent them. Can we go back to the drawing board and be concerned about implementing these regulations? Because if we continue in a systemic way, to undo the architecture, the economic, social, and political architecture that is supposed to bring about progress, then we may never realize our progress. So beyond the administration, the present administration, coming out with policy projections and, of course, making rightful moves, is also the need, for moral reorientation, and that moral reorientation will come if the judiciary is pepped up, to do its job properly, apprehension, prosecution, and sanction as a way of deterrence. And beyond that, again, it's for us to see nice optics from the leaders, optics around making proper sacrifice, and beyond that as well, not just mouthing things or ending at pronouncement, but of course, we want to see action, action that is reflective of change. Right. And before you know it, you see citizens keying into their vision and mission, cardinal objectives, as the case could be.
Well, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, always good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for having this discussion with us.